what I feel at Jan van Eyck now is that despite having this clear policy plan and being interested in engaging with these questions, the statement is partially also that this can only be engaged by a plurality of points of views and not by a monoculture of approaches. And therefore, that makes me believe that then the best strategy for this, for the time being, because the discourse can change and we can learn with the experience, right? But for the time being, is to guarantee that that plurality of practices is still in the range of the residents that we have.
Okay, then here we go. Hello world. My name is Sepp Eckenhaussen and I'm a researcher at the Insitute of Network Cultures. And today I'm the host of the, I don't know how many episode of The Void. The Void is an audiovisual podcast that explores future scenarios in culture, politics, and technology. Today's episode is a conversation on the future of art residencies with Bruno Alves de Almeida. We will discuss the state of art residencies after the COVID pandemic. How to imagine the future of artist residencies if travel can no longer be taken for granted. Will we see more hyperlocal or online residencies? What is the position of residency programs in a world full of crises? And how sustainable is the financial models for art residencies that we have right now? As I said before, today here with us to discuss these questions is Bruno Alves de Almeida. Welcome, Bruno.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Bruno is a curator and architect based in the Netherlands, alumnus of the Appel curatorial program, and currently curator and resident liaison of the Jan van Eyck Academy in Maastricht. He's also a tutor at the Design Academy in Eindhoven, and he has developed a context-specific and multidisciplinary curatorial practice, which has resulted in projects fostering intersections between art, architecture, urban theory, design, and the social and natural sciences, often going beyond customary exhibition models and spaces, and experimenting with the formats for production, presentation, and experience of artistic practice.
Wow.
It's a mouthful. Nice.
Oh my gosh, it's short enough, that bio.
Okay, so let's start with the starting point for our conversation today. You obviously work at the Jan van Eyck Academy, which is a post-academic institution. I think you'll get into explaining a little bit what that is later. Mm-hmm. But we have a research program at the Insitute of Network Cultures, which is called Our Creative Reset, in which we explore future scenarios for work in the cultural sector in the Netherlands after COVID. And we're here to talk about art residencies after COVID and what are the future models that we can find there. So maybe we should first explore a little bit what Jan van Eyck Academy is at this point. Or wait a second, do you want to first go into the COVID situation? Or
yeah, maybe I think it makes sense to, especially for me, to talk about this intersection between COVID or this whole moment that we all witnessed in relation to the format of the art residency.
Okay. Because
my experience of working, I started working in an art residency, the Jan van Eyck that you mentioned, was tied to the COVID pandemic, the beginning of the pandemic. Mm-hmm. So I started working less than 1 month before the pandemic started. So my experience at the Jan van Eyck, and I've been there for 2.5 years. So, I mean, today it's been roughly 2.5 years since it all started, almost 3 years. So it has been indissociable from these global events. So I thought it fits like a glove to talk about this format and the COVID through my experience. But maybe as a disclaimer, it's also interesting to understand that I have been working at Jan van Eyck under these circumstances that are now slowly going back to normal. So there are also lots of things that I haven't witnessed in the normality of before. So I'm just going to give a very personal account, and I'm not going to also try to... I know you're going to ask some more general questions and to think about formats of artist residency at large, but it's important for me to also contextualize my experience within the format of the Jan van Eyck, and not also trying to give answers to a variety of types of residencies that are very different to the Jan van Eyck Academy. So let's try to balance these specificities and these generalizations in a responsible way. We're going to do it. Let me see. And I'm also not trying to, talk about the genealogy of the history of artist residency, which is such an interesting topic, but I'm also not the person
for another time
to do it. So now it's the specificities of the Jan van Eyck, and we're both looking at the computers. Maybe it's good to say, because it's our compass for the conversation.
Yes.
So, but I think for the camera is a bit weird.
I'm sorry, watchers. We've been properly preparing a Google Doc together.
Yeah. So now about the specificities of the Jan van Eyck, maybe it's good to just give a brief outline. So the Jan van Eyck is one of the 5 post-academic institutions here in the Netherlands, and it's based in Maastricht. It's located in Maastricht, in the south of the Netherlands, which makes it also, I think, a specific. It sets the tone, I think, for the residency. This specific locality and the size of the city. The other distinctive features are it's a multidisciplinary residency. It's not only geared at visual artists, also designers, curators, architects, people working in between these categories, which is very interesting. And we have around 35 to 40 participants yearly in several types of durations, in like residency durations. The normal one is 11 months, but we have shorter ones of 3 months, and it goes up to 6 months. And on top of the residency being the core business, we have a public program that operates in the interface between the residency and the public, the wider public. And I think that gives, throughout the conversation, maybe I'll explain more.
Maybe I can ask, for the listeners and viewers that don't know, what is a post-academic institution?
So the post-academic institution is not really an educational institution that awards a specific title. Mm-hmm. So the post-academic institution is a further development of, in these cases, artist professional practice, right?
Yeah. So these are people that already went to art academies most of the time, and then after that, at some point in their career, decide that it's good for them to come to...
Yeah. And we don't have a specific age range. I mean, each post-academic institution has their own criteria for, allowing or giving space to residents. In our specific case, we don't have such a tight age range. So we have people that might have recently graduated, even though it's quite important to already have some experience, some meaningful experience professionally. Mm-hmm. And we have people further away in their careers, like already with a lot of experience. So we also have that combination of different types of moments of artistic practice.
And when people come to the Jan van Eyck Academy, what do they do and what is expected of them?
So
what does a day-to-day practice look like there?
So the residents are given a space and a stipend, and we'll go into that more in detail later. So they can have their own time. They can take their own time to develop in their own pace their projects, and we organize a series of communal activities and public programs. They're not mandatory, but they are a part of the experience of the residency. So there's these 2 very different strands of engagement. One is your own individual trajectory that the Jan van Eyck tries to, we try to promote modes of being together and collectivity that are, I think, part of the identity of the institution. Yeah. But you can opt for developing your own trajectory independently. And then we have a very busy calendar of communal activities that are not mandatory. Yeah. So that's a bit of the balance. Okay. And also a series of workshops and facilities that participants can use to develop their work.
Yeah. And since you came there at the start of COVID, and also maybe it's about time, about 2 years on, that we take a step back and look at the lessons. We can dig into this COVID experience a little bit more. Can you tell us about, first of all, how did you experience COVID in an institution like that, which is already always supposed to be a bit of a bubble, I guess. And how did it trigger you to rethink the institution that you have there?
Yeah. So my experience of COVID in relation to the work that I was developing there was very intense, because it was, I mean, COVID in itself put us all in a state of anxiety and uncertainty that I think was unprecedented. My personal experience was also moving to Maastricht during that time, and then being in a new place, and then being locked, shut down from it in a way.
And
so,
just like for context, Maastricht is not big, right?
Maastricht is not big.
It's a small town which has a few art institutions, and Jan van Eyck is definitely the biggest one of them, or at least has the biggest community around it. So you're really
I was
on an island. Can I say that?
Was on an island, in an island. And then in relation to my work at Jan van Eyck, so there's a coincidence of happening. So COVID was a major one, but simultaneous to that, we were also launching the new policy plan that was supposed to start in the beginning of 2020. That was put forward by Hisham Khalidi, who is the current director of the Jan van Eyck, who has been there since 2018. So that the launch of the policy plan was coincident with the COVID outburst. And then I'll talk about a policy plan in a bit.
Okay.
And then there was also the change of identity of the institution. So this rebrand, the new identity of the Jan van Eyck that reflects this change of policy plan. So for me, it was being cut away from being in a new context and in a situation that is new for everyone, working very differently than before, but also without knowing what is the normality of work at Jan van Eyck, because I started in Open Studios, which is a big event that kind of mobilized a lot of attention and energy, and then COVID started, so I did not witness the normality of working there. And I had to start working already, rewriting many of the texts in the light of this new policy plan. And the new policy plan, maybe I can go into it now.
Please.
So basically, I was writing a lot about an institution that I was still coming to terms with understanding in a time that was completely abnormal. And then the policy plan that Hisham put forward has the main, the central aspect of it is understanding what is the civic agents and contributions that arts and cultural practices at large have in relation to the climate breakdown and all the associated, social, political, and economic entanglements, and the temporality of the policy plan, even though it covers it spans 4 years, tries to go beyond that. So the policy plan attaches itself rhetorically to the IPCC report of 1.5 degrees that sets a target for all humanity that until 2030 we would have to stay under the 1.5, which is not the case anymore.
Yeah.
And then tries to propose an institutional trajectory that's working towards that goal simultaneously. So, of course, this policy plan grew very urgent and tangible in the times of COVID. So that's why I was saying that for me, the experience of starting to work in an institution with a coincidence of all of these factors and this new motto or impetus behind the institution versus new identity was a lot to digest and to think through.
Mm-hmm.
But it was also interesting to do it from the position of like embodying the state of abnormality that COVID brought onto us.
Yeah. I think one of the main reasons why it's exciting for us to have you on here is exactly because Jan van Eyck is an institution that is not afraid of rethinking itself and repositioning itself and engaging with these social and societal questions very openly. Which I guess is very much what you're describing. You did. How did that relate to the day-to-day lived experiences of being in the Jan van Eyck Academy during that time? Was there an enhanced sense of coincidence, of urgencies, Did you feel like it was kind of a pressure cooker for finding a new identity as an institution?
In a way, yes, because we had no alternative. I don't think any institution, we had to work differently. And there are many layers to answer that question. Also important to understand that the moment when it happened was also a moment of transitions between the group that was there, the group of participants that were there, and the new group that was coming. So that meant the people that were there had a very weird end of residency, whereas the others that were coming also had this completely uncertain beginning of the residency. So to facilitate that transition, as a staff and as an institution was very complex, no? Because we also didn't know how to navigate that uncertainty. So in that sense, he was also adding up the complexity. It was not like the group that was there could stay. No, people had to move in a moment where they couldn't, and the others had to start their residency in a moment where no one could travel. So all these questions became even more present, and we had to find solutions. But on the other hand, all the things that the policy plan proposed as threads of research or thinking then became really urgent and tangible. So the translation between rhetorics and modus operandi and practice became like a necessity rather than it was beyond the policy plan. It became a tangible necessity rather than a consequence of the vision, which I find interesting now, because the vision and the necessity kind of also coincided in a moment in time.
Yeah, it's like thinking about in the like early 2020, like this sense of urgency and necessity was very broadly shared, and we're gonna look for a new normal, and everything is gonna be different. And then now 2 years onwards, there's very few institutions that actually managed to change, and I feel like you're one of them. So I'm trying to if we look back, what were the moments of these lived experience that you really caught on to in order to push this new policy plan to really change something?
Yeah, I think like the external perception of the Jan van Eyck might have changed because the policy plan is setting the tone for a series of things. I think then, of course, the change takes longer, and it's in many different temporalities, and some things take longer. And if you want to do them right, you have to take steps that are not so immediate. So when you you have the external perception that I don't, because I'm so enmeshed in the institution, but I see that not everything has changed. No, it's the core is still the same, and there are some things that are inevitable. COVID made them inevitable to change, and now they have become naturalized, like this online presence, for example, or the hybrid between online and offline events, or the fact that you don't assume that all the guests that you can include, you need to fly them to the Jan van Eyck, But other things haven't changed yet, and it takes longer. And so this whole complete victorious change, it's also not really the case.
Right. So when I speak to residents of post-academic institutions, they often tell me that this is the time that they, in their whole career, feel the most cared for, basically. So I think post-academic institutions are par excellence an example of institutionalized care and support structures. Can you break that down a little bit? And what are the support structures that the Jan van Eyck puts in place? And how did you also rethink those during the COVID time?
Yeah. I mean, the residency format in itself is a support structure, or it's there to give time and space to participants or artists to develop their own work. in many different ways and under many different umbrellas. And I think, after COVID, we're still under COVID, but because of COVID, I think the question for us was, and in relation to the policy plan, was much more like, and I wrote it down, how can residencies provide alternative openings and infrastructure to nurture artistic work in the midst of current societal transformation and environmental crisis? And again, this question can be answered very differently depending on the specificities of each residency in their own local contexts. But specifically at Jan van Eyck, so I've divided some of the small things that...
Yeah, let's just go through them.
Yeah. So before, during, and after, and maybe after less, but there's a process of application, So basically the residency starts before the participants are there. And there's a lot of work that goes into it before we perceived that the residency has started. So one of the things that was just a very simple gesture, but I think it opened up more what Jan van Eyck could be for many people, is the fact that the application fee got waived for applicants living and from the least developed countries, low-income countries, and lower middle-income countries and territories of the DAC list. DAC stands for Development Assistance Committee, and which is something that we didn't have before. And it's not like maybe it's not the sexiest change, but it's such a relevant change, specifically if you think that there's a coincidence between these, in many cases, these least developed countries with the countries that are being hit most hardly due to climate change. The case of Pakistan, for instance. So it becomes even harder to get people from those places there, adding to the difficulty that already existed. So, the application fee is waived. It's just the beginning of something that needs to be even more, provide more structures to. But, yeah.
Can I follow up briefly on that? Because, indeed, even if it's a relatively small fee within the Netherlands, I know that for foreign applicants, it can really be quite a large barrier to even pay a few €100. How much is the application fee?
I think the application is 70. I need to look at the Jan van Eyck website because otherwise this is recorded forever and I'm fired. Application.
Right. But it's not a very high sum, right? Here in the Netherlands.
No.
But it can be for people from other places.
Yeah, it can be 65 excluding VAT or 78.
Okay. So
euros.
Can you tell a little bit about why do post-academic institutions have these fees to begin with, and what is the process of why is it it sounds like such a small but relevant change? Is it just that easy, or is that already a difficult decision to make, to waive those fees?
Well, I cannot generalize here.
Okay.
I can only talk for the Jan van Eyck
Sure.
and maybe not. Well, the application fee, I'm not sure about this. So it would be good to double check before it's aired.
Okay, we can do that.
But I can do that also with. But the application fee is served to cover the cost of the selection process. We have a jury, we have a selection committee, and it's several phases to go through. We have more than 1,000 applications, so that application fee is geared towards those costs, and yeah.
Okay.
And I really don't know if I think it's relevant to waive it. I don't think, well, every cost makes a difference in cultural art institutions, I think. So I think it is relevant to waive it, and it didn't happen before for a reason. But I think it's also not the Achilles heel for the institution to waive the application fee.
Yeah.
But
okay.
maybe we need to double check that, because
Yeah.
it might be, I might not be aware of a wider like mathematic behind it.
What are the other support structures in place in the application procedure?
Well, so the maybe, and this starts then connecting to before the residency starts. I think there is, in terms of support structures and facilitating as much as we can the process of coming of certain participants that are from further away or that don't have that many resources to come. It starts with the responsibility of the application, no? Of the selection of the residents, which with COVID, it got way more complex to bring people from further away places to the Netherlands, logistically, but also in terms of bureaucracy, because of visas and papers. And I don't deal directly with it at Jan van Eyck, but I work closely to colleagues that deal with it. So we try to be careful. We select based on the quality of work. And when I say quality of work, it's much more about the alignment of, the trajectory of the work of that participant, of that applicant, with the intentions that that person brings to come to the Jan van Eyck. Sometimes there are great practices that just fall out because maybe the alignment between these two factors is not so strong as in other cases. But so that's the starting point for the selection. But then as an institution, you need, part of the caring infrastructure is also understanding how many people like that you can bring responsibly to the institution, which means also counting how many collectives and duos, because we have special conditions, and this is also one of the other measures that we adapted that were not there before. Special conditions for families, more stipend for collectives and duos. So that goes into the maths, and then also considering like how complex will be to bring people from territories in which the visa application is tricky. So we don't want to create a situation where we select a lot of people and then cannot give them assistance in coming. And what I hear from my colleagues is that this assistance has become increasingly complex because or after COVID. So I think there's a connection there.
Yeah.
And then the next step would be promoting sustainable travel towards coming to the residency or to Maastricht, like HIAP, the Helsinki International Artists Program, already does, and I think they do it quite well. So I think that's a step that we haven't taken yet.
But like, you're actually mentioning few points in which you really changed I guess that the new policy also changed the support structure that you have in place, like carefully selecting who you can support coming, but also just literally paying more to parent residents, for instance, right?
Yeah. There was a slight increase in all of the stipends, so we're paying more to everyone. But yeah, I mean, it's still not a stipend that is completely comfortable to the conditions that people are living. But there was an increase in stipend too. Yeah.
Okay.
And then maybe during the residency, also in terms of structure of support, let me know if it's getting too boring and I can just speed it up and like make it super exciting.
Yes, let's speed up a bit. That's good.
So yeah, during the residency, and it's almost done. I'm almost done with these measures. So accommodation is it's always very tricky, I mean, even for people who are living here in the Netherlands and everywhere, accommodation is a big problem. We have houses for some of the participants, but not all. And we're working on it to be able to host everyone. And something that was also evident after COVID is that we have all these like financial and tangible facilities and infrastructures, but we also put in place like a mental, psychological we have a psychologist available also for the participants and staff members, because also the lines between professional development and personal life in a residency, in a place that hosts these people for almost 1 year, are really, like, how do you say that, enmeshed, like brought together. So this is another infrastructure that is in place to be used.
Yeah, I would almost say that, like, bringing together different elements that you mentioned, like having a family, needing a place to live, having a psychological state of mind. The COVID triggered you to think more of residence as a human being, with all of its different aspects.
Yeah.
And that the responsibility of a residency program is also towards that human being, not just the artist or designer part of them.
Yeah.
Could I say it like that?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's definitely a living organism in a way. That I think that's what you mean, no?
Yeah, it's like you can't just facilitate an artist to grow in a bubble, but you need to facilitate the human that is that artist.
Absolutely, yeah.
With all of the aspects of their life. And how about after residency? Are they just...
Well, I put here after residency, but I don't think we do help participants specifically after the residency, either for, helping them with specific opportunities or awards or, letters of recommendation. I think that's the normal.
Mm-hmm.
But actually, I wish I had more points, sub points to add there. I think it's something interesting to think how also that, like, the temporality of the residency can be expanded, because before there's a lot of work bringing these people here. So maybe there should be a balance also with the after.
Yeah.
What would it be then? Especially because in practical terms, while the group is there, so the new group has not arrived yet. They will arrive beginning of November, so in less than 1 month, like in a couple of weeks. And the open call for the next group is already open. So in practical terms, we start working with the upcoming group while the current group is still here. So I think with this after residency support, it becomes a pragmatical incapability, because we're already working on the next group.
Yeah.
And this taps into, like, the durations and the temporalities.
We'll unpack that a little bit later, right? Shall we move to the relations and context?
Yes.
So I think it's important to put this conversation about COVID and the residency into a little bit of a broader context, because it seems that we live in a world in which the state of crisis has been normalized. I don't remember last time we were not in a crisis. There's the COVID system, there's systemic racism, the war in Ukraine, the refugee crisis that is now very urgent in the Netherlands, climate collapse, precarity in the arts, protests in Iran. And I wonder, can we unpack this relationship, like, of an arts institution in the world with relation to the crises a bit more? Maybe starting with the concrete question, as an institution, do you feel like you have to relate to all of these questions, or do you pick? And if so, how?
Yeah, that's a very important but really complex question.
Mm-hmm.
Let me start a bit back, because I think, the policy plan ultimately, the way I understand it, is about this connection between what might be understood as a self-enclosed environment of an artist's residence and connecting it to the world, to what's happening outside. I think the environmental crisis is not just about ecology, it's like it's a web of things. So I think at the core of the policy plan, the connection to the outside world is there and is unequivocal. And then the institution needs to work towards it in many different ways. One of these ways is by addressing, specific crises. Something that I was thinking about is that the COVID pandemic made it evident that the crisis was distributed for all, because many many crises that we have gone through have not been so well distributed. So I think it's like whose crisis is it, and in the end it's all of our responsibility. The pandemic showed that everything is entangled. So I think after COVID, other people's problems, another part of the world's problems, it's clear there also are problems. And then this makes it really hard to pick and choose, because yes, it's everyone's problems, no?
It sounds very nice indeed, but how do you deal with that practically, right?
I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. We had many discussions at Jan van Eyck, starting from, Black Lives Matter, and then the whole sequence of emergencies that we had before. And we put out statements to most of them, not to all of them. But there are also so many other ongoing conflicts and ongoing injustices and genocides that are happening that are not getting picked up by the media. And then when it's relevant to bring them up, but as an institution, when do you position yourself when maybe this is not the hot topic, or there's not a wave of discussion around it? And of course, hosting a group of people from all over the world, when you identify a certain problem or a certain conflict that you want to make your position clear towards, and you don't identify other that might be, less visible, but that might be really close to one of the participants, then there's also a problem there. I really don't have an answer to that. I think the positioning, but this is my opinion. The positioning should be clear, and there should be a public statement. The question of how and when, I think, varies depending on the issue, because it's not enough also just to post things. So what is there to do? And the other doubt that I have is not really a doubt. I think it's important to have a position in terms of discourse of what the institution stands for. And that needs to be negotiated between the individual components of the institution, which are the staff members and the participants in this case, and the institution as an organism, as a group of people. And that's delicate too. But then I think maybe after this public positioning, there can be other measures that don't need to happen immediately, that can be more sustained over time, that can be the start of something else, that can be the start of coalitions, So I think there has to be some sort of understanding of what can be effective immediate action and public positioning, and what is not effective if it happens immediately.
Yeah.
Because things sometimes take time, especially with big institutions, no?
I do think there is, okay, so maybe I need to also position myself here as I work at the Institute of Network Cultures, but I also work at Platform VK, which is an artist interest organization, and we also publish these kind of statements. And what I often find is that it's very tricky. They can be, it can be fake activism, right? Just discursively positioning yourself and not doing anything. But I think something that is sometimes underestimated is that if you make a statement and you are willing to follow up on them when the right partners and coalitions emerge, that this can really lead to big changes. It can take a bit of time. But then to make that into a concrete question, do you feel like the COVID pandemic has made it clear that there's an urgency for art institutions to maybe not a one-size-fits-all, but to develop their own repertoire of what are the different measures that can be used to relate to different social issues? Like, okay, the statement is one, meetings are one, but it can also be putting up exhibitions, hosting residencies, depending on the institution. Do you think that we should propagate this kind of repertoire?
I think the repertoire is being built, at least here in the Netherlands. I felt that there were attempts in building coalitions around like Black Lives Matter and being consequential about these public statements and not just have the statement in as an end in itself. If those were successful or not, then that's another question, because also there was such a intense series of events happening one after the other that it became overwhelming for everyone. But I think that repertoire is being developed. Also because I think staff members and especially in post-academic institutions or academic institutions, the students or the participants are demanding that position. And I think that's good. I think, of course, we have people in positions of power that are also concerned and interested in having that kind of agenda. But I feel it's interesting to observe that there is this accountability that's being pushed by the residents and by the students and by some staff members, maybe.
And this is effective as well.
Yeah. And if it's not oversimplifying the understanding that everything needs to be efficient right now, because it's not the way it works. No, I think we need to complexify. We need to ask for action, or action needs to be taken, but we need to understand the complexity of things and the time that it takes to act promptly, but still cohesively and responsibly. Yeah. And that doesn't sound to be the quickest response. Yeah. But there's also situations. No? There are situations of emergency, and response needs to be taken now.
Yeah, this responsiveness and talking about it also raises a question that I would like to have your take on about the very role of artist residencies, because I guess that traditionally the understanding is that the artist residency exactly protects the artist that is in residence from the turbulence in the world around it.
Yeah.
So taking an active position seems at odds with that traditional position. How do you negotiate, and how do you think it can be negotiated, this tension between taking a position in the world and creating a free space for artists to develop?
Yeah, that's a question that has been discussed a lot in the Jan van Eyck, also with this policy plan being so visible. Well, what I observe in the Jan van Eyck also, because we have such a varied group of people, that even though we have this policy plan and we have many, many measures, maybe I'll also tell you about the programmatic and structural measures that come from the policy plan. Even though we have all that in place, I think that we still offer the possibility for people just to develop their own trajectory. I don't think it's either or. So if the COVID pandemic made evident that actually this threshold between the individuality and the privacy of your studio and the world is very thin, so that's an inevitable, I think, conclusion. So even if we wanted to protect artistic practice from everything that's happening around, is that something that is even possible? So that, I don't know.
Yeah.
And then understanding that might be an impossibility, especially considering the 2 last years. I think maybe the question more is how to provide different modes of access to engaging with what's happening through artistic practice in a residency space. And I think at the Van Eyck specifically, there's a nice range of different modes of artistic practice. Ones that are more centered in other things that are not necessarily directly the complexities around the world, neither are about climate or ecology or anything like that. They are centered in their own individual trajectories that ultimately connect to these things anyway, but maybe in a more skewed way, right? And then there are other trajectories that really connect more with it, and maybe these artists take more from from the public program or from the policy plan of the Jan van Eyck. But this plurality and the fact that we offer different modes of working, or different possibilities of working and using your time and engaging with the community however you want, is, I think, an answer to that. I don't think, despite the clarity of the policy plan, there is this monocultural approach. It's the opposite. No, it's less of a theme and more like an understanding that of this inevitability of being detached from the context and from the world. But that does not mean that your work should thematically address these things and therefore be instrumentalized. Because
this is the question, right? Like if you acknowledge all of these very big urgencies, should art then also be at the service of solving them, or an art institution? Yeah.
I mean, there are many different types of artistic practices, and there are artists whose mission has affinities to that positioning, and that's great. There are artists whose affinity with that positioning is less so, and I think there's a value in having that range, that big range. Personally, then, I mean, you can have your preferences and I can have my preferences in terms of what I think is more enticing as artistic production today, right? But I think the variety that we have at the Jan van Eyck specifically shows that we don't need to address the issue in only one way and instrumentalize art. I understand that this happens, many times, but I feel that even though there's a direction that is clearly traced, there's still within that framework a lot of plurality and a lot of variety, and it's not just about that putting these urgencies in front of the specificities of the artistic practices.
Right. So would you say that for you at Jan van Eyck to have a successful residency program, it's exactly effective to have this wider range of engaged social practices, but also more on the autonomous side of aesthetic art production?
But can you, what do you mean by autonomous side? Because I've heard, I think I've heard another podcast from The Void where you were very passionately talking about this supposed autonomy of art. Yeah. So what do we mean when we say autonomy?
No, I mean, I'm cornering myself when using this word now. I think that the word autonomy in the current context is of neoliberal society is abused in equaling autonomy to being economically self-sustainable, as in accommodating your own autonomous space to do your art production. Generally, no. What I was trying to ask now, there's a wider variety of artistic practices. Some are much more engaged, and others are much more of a traditional studio practice. Do you think that that are not at least directly engaged with any kind of social issues? Do you think that for a successful residency program, you need to engage people from throughout the spectrum in your residencies in Jan van Eyck?
Could be. If we're talking about the Jan van Eyck specifically, I think so. At this point, yes. The plurality is a value, and it's in the profile of the Jan van Eyck, I feel coherent. But it really depends. You have many different residencies, and again, not trying to generalize. On the contrary, I think there are different residencies that have their own mottos, and I think there's space for those who put the emphasis in this autonomous, detached, or whatever adjective it is, studio practice, right? And that's great. There are others that are completely rooted in the specificity of their sites. So the agenda is different. So I think I think it's great to have a variety of possibilities that artists can develop their work however they want. What I feel at Jan van Eyck now is that despite having this clear policy plan and being interested in engaging with these questions, the statement is partially also that this can only be engaged by a plurality of points of views and not by a monoculture of approaches. And therefore, that makes me believe that then the best strategy for this, for the time being, because the discourse can change and we can learn with the experience, right? But for the time being, is to guarantee that that plurality of practices is still in the range of the residents that we have.
Right. We talked a lot about like theoretically how to engage with different urgencies in the world, but looking at Jan van Eyck, there's one that you very specifically centralize in your plans for the coming years, which is the climate collapse. Can you like just briefly talk us through choosing engagement with this certain urgency, what could then translate to in practice?
Yes. So I think there are two main strands that then ramify into others, but I will not go so much in detail. So there's the program, so the more content-based events that we do there. And then there's a more structural, operational dimension. So maybe I'll start with the structure because there are less points. So we started the sustainability plan for the institution. And it's not just completely practical and technical and logistical. It's also connected to the content and to the way we work with artists. So it goes really from the most practical to the most conceptual. And then also goes into different temporalities, the short term, medium term, and long term. So we have a green team. We have a nature research department in the Jan van Eyck, which works with artists, but it's also leading the sustainability plan and steering this green team, in which many staff members, including myself, are part to. And also we want to have one of the upcoming participants. And we also had an external consultancy. So all these intentions are being made tangible in the building and in the way we work. But that takes time and mindset change. And then programmatically with the events, we try also to engage with these complex topics, but always in the interface between the production and house, or what the participants' practices are about, and bridging to the outside world, so other artists' practices or scientists, academics, etc. So the first program that I curated there, in this conjunction of COVID, new policy plan, and new identity, was called Environmental Identities, and it was a 7-part program where we explored the correlation between self and social identity and environmental change. So we were speculating like how this super fast environmental tangible change could then precipitate us into other modes of being, both individually and collectively, but also what institutions should be in light to that. And that was really when the Jan van Eyck was changing the identity. And then we have this annual program called Urgency Intensive. That is the moment where the Jan van Eyck puts on the table these questions in a more straightforward way. And in the previous 2 years, I curated this intergovernmental panel on art and climate change. That is also taking one step further in understanding how far we can go with this rhetorical alignment to the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, because the policy plan connects to this report that they published. And it were 2 years of fruitful speculation, and we also engaged with 2 vice chairs of the IPCC, and we brought them to the discussion. And we were trying to understand like art in the interface between science and policy making, global policy making. Then we had Transforming Institutions, the first on social and climate justice with Rolando Vasquez. And then the second edition, Culture, the missing link on climate action, with Alison Tickle, who's the founder of Julie's Bicycle, an organization that has been dealing with these sustainability and climate emergency related questions for many years. But we also have the Future Materials Bank that has its open source of sustainable materials that is led by the Nature Research Department. And we have
So
future.
that's literally in the building, right?
It's mostly virtually because
Okay.
there are many materials, but we have many samples in the building. And we do future material encounters in which we invite the makers to have workshops and talk about those materials with participants. And there's an online data bank with those things. And then there's also art and science residencies. We have 3 different models of art and science residencies that I will not go into detail, but that combine a little bit the artistic trajectory with these questions.
Yeah. Okay. Personal anecdote. I remember it was April 2020, 1.5 months into the very first COVID lockdown, and I heard of someone who told me that they had an at-home residency, meaning that they were supposed to travel to some beautiful place abroad and stay there for a month or two, get a stipend, work, develop new work, exhibit. And due to COVID, it was like once of a sudden just changed into, no, we're going to still give you the money, but you're going to stay at home in your own tiny apartment and you can do the production there. And like this for me was like the saddest, I think the saddest development within the art world during COVID. Like such an exciting, inspiring event turning into just like being trapped in your own house. Which was a very harsh confrontation with the fact that mobility is not always a given, right? We have to start thinking, or we had to start thinking in new ways about locality and mobility, and I would like to impact it a little bit with you. The fact that traveling became so hard or impossible during COVID, how do you deal with this? And what were the most important questions that arose? And how does that lead to different attitudes to mobility in the future?
Well, maybe I'll read a snippet of Taru Elfing's text, Cosmopolitics for Retreat, which is in a really nice book, Contemporary Artists' Residencies, Reclaiming Time and Space, page 224-25. And I think we share many of the questions that she articulated it here. So I quote, "While mobility can no longer be embraced uncritically, there is an acute need for ever stronger arguments for its necessity. But what does it mean to be mobile in times of enforced migrations, reinforced borders, growing xenophobia, and escalating climate crisis and mass extinctions? Who has access to global circulation? How and in what processes of value production does mobility take part? Who and what are actually served by travel and, for example, networking? What is the cost of being on the move, ecologically, socially, personally, and intellectually?" End of quote. So these were some of the questions that we're also dealing with. And similarly to your friend, I told you that when COVID hit, we were in the transition from one group to another. And instead of postponing the residency to a later point that was still unclear, we paid the participants while they were still at their home countries, but still working as hard as we could to get them here in the Netherlands when was possible, which meant different temporalities for different people, no? So, and then this obviously led us to think, what would an art residency be without travel? And these ideas of internationalism, or like how to foster intercultural exchange community, which I feel is extremely important when these notions of internationalization and are so tricky under these conditions today, not just because of the impossibility of traveling, but also because of like the ethics of certain modes of travel in our world. And then, like, what also does it mean to state that a residency is local?
Yeah, there were also some art institutions that said like, we're not going to do any live streaming. We're just going to be very local, right? This is like these seem to be the two responses to the lack of mobility during COVID. It was like enforced on all of us, but as Dado Elfing's
Yeah.
citation shows, it's always confronting some like people. So we need to deal with this structurally. Like, do you go really local, or do you go completely digital, or something in between? And how does the in between look?
I mean, this also can work differently under different mottos of artist residency. I think then it's clear in certain residency formats that it makes sense that they go local because of their mission statement. I think under the umbrella of the policy plan now at Jan van Eyck, at least how I perceived it, is inclusivity is embedded within that equation and accessibility. And this is also something that Hisham and the staff members and I think Jan van Eyck stands for undoubtedly. So then when this question of locality arose, it's like how to still have the variety and the plurality, but also to be accessible and open as much as you can. And I brought here another example of this impossibility of how like this impossibility of traveling and supporting artists locally can be coherent for certain formats of residency. So Bach in Utrecht has a fellowship for situated practice in which they support people in their own local contexts. But for example, there are models in which situatedness and not moving is part of the equation. But it's much more about like what does the artist residency stands for, and how to deal with these contradictions when, for example, at Jan van Eyck we do want this intercultural community there.
But at the Jan van Eyck Academy, at the same time, you bring in a local farmer as one of your tutors, right? So I feel like you're trying to do both even at the same time.
Yeah.
Maybe we don't have to resolve this right now, but I would like to maybe challenge you to speculate. Are we gonna see much more online global residencies, or are we gonna see much more hyper-local residencies when traveling becomes and stays more difficult or more self-evident, less self-evident?
I think both. And it's not a way of escaping your question, but it's true, because on the one hand, there's a very short time we became really familiar with the online. So it's already part of the way we work, of the way I think this online door open, and it's will not close down anytime soon. And I see it becoming more sophisticated and easier and more naturalized. So I think it will stay. But because of the challenges that lie ahead, inevitably, I feel there's also another strand that will put more emphasis on local practices and situated practices, either through doing what Bach is doing, which is supporting remotely these practices all over the world, and through the online platform, creating these virtual communities that can still benefit from each other. For example. But I think probably it's going to be harder and harder to have people, bringing people from many types of, many different countries in one specific locality.
Yeah. Shall we move to Dado Elfing's second citation?
Yes, because it's a perfect segue between this idea of mobility and what we want to discuss next, which is financial models. So again, Dado Elfing, but in a different text that you can find online, titled "Imagine a World Without Travel: Artist Residencies in the Future Present." And I quote, "Financial precarity pushes the circulation ceaselessly forwards. While residencies act as career stepping stones and, at times, pay the rent and even a fee in the best cases, residencies have also often become just another space-time filled endlessly with deadlines for further applications or other commitments, rather than a time and space reserved for the recalibration of one's practice or experimentation without predefined outcomes. They have also become retreats for the exhausted, rather than retreats from the everyday. what kind of collectivity might be possible in these current conditions?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oof, that makes it very urgent, right? In a cultural system in which precarity and precarization have become both a practical and an ethical and I would say, governmental norm. To put it very, very sharply, this can translate to the question: is the artist residency merely a band-aid for structural wounds, or is in what kind of world would we need in which the model of artist residencies can become more durable or can flourish? Yeah.
Easy question. The format of artist residency can become a band-aid because, it's normal that while you're doing an artist residency, you're already applying for the next one because it's a way to make ends meet and give you time and space and fee in best, like Taro said, in best case scenarios, to be able to pay your rent and do your practice. So the residency hopping can be a way of surviving and sustaining your practice in a patchy but effective way, depending on the cases and where you circulate. So maybe this is connected to what we said before of how to design also the afterlife of the residency to allow for structures of support even after the end of how to expand the temporality of the residency, also to prevent that this residency hopping becomes a mode of survival rather than a mode of developing the work in the most fruitful way, right?
Yeah.
But again, we're in a very privileged context here in the Netherlands. Like there are other places where the discussion is very different, huh?
Yeah.
And I think that's connected to the second question: what kind of society or what kind of world would the artist? It's hard to be idealistic now because there are these discrepancies, and I was born in Brazil. I worked in Brazil for a long time, and if we're talking from that perspective, it would be a completely different answer than talking from the privileges that we have here in the Netherlands, let alone in other places that are even not so much. We don't have the infrastructures to support the arts, right? But I think maybe to start with would be a society in which the artistic process is more valued than necessarily the output. Mm-hmm. And I think this connects to the last thing that we want to talk today. So we can go maybe later into that, or maybe now, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think if the modes of presentation that we can devise for general public, but also for funders and for specialists and for politics, can somehow integrate this idea of the process and of the development being more, being as fundamental as the moment of visibility of the output of the public exhibition, then maybe we as a culture and society can give more value to sustaining those processes instead of just funding an output or funding a result or a product that comes with it.
I think it's like maybe this can be my moment as an outsider to just propose a perspective, which is that it cannot be expected of an organization. Like an organization cannot really. It's very hard for an organization to be part of a solidarity structure if it is not expected to be so by its funders, right? So maybe what we need to see is art residency and post-academic institutions coming together and saying what we do is about process, it's about the value of the retreat to recalibrate your artistic practice. It's not about a retreat from the fatigue of everyday life. So in order to work towards a better functioning of our programs, we support basic income for all, universal basic income.
Yeah.
This could be a direction to not undermine the practice within or the work of the residency institutions, but to contextualize it in a political manner that makes it clear that in the current way, how, like, you can't even blame an art residency institution for being a very privileged site, because like the situation that we work in is just so precarious, generally speaking.
Yeah.
To do something else cannot be expected of the individual institution, but the individual institution can take a role in a social debate or political discussion.
I agree. And I think, for example,
please go.
Sorry. No, just thinking about, for example, the Documenta this year.
Yeah.
It resonates really a lot with what they try to do, no? This permanence of the artist there, this modes of collective being together, and also thinking of an alternative economic system that could foster that, not only throughout the 100 days of Documenta, but also before and after, no? Because that was supposed to be a sustained infrastructure for, their own practices after Documenta.
Yeah.
And I think what's interesting about that is also what it creates with the public. There are certain expectations that come with public, and by public I mean people who visit museums and the wider public that encompasses both specialized public, funders, everyone. And putting the emphasis on the process and of the infrastructures that allow the artists to do their work, both situated in their own localities, but also at large, for the modes of presentation, such as exhibitions, I think creates something there that brings that kind of underlines the necessity to support the process. This was my point before, right?
Yeah.
And then maybe there's a way of working with this mode of public presentation and engagement through the residency format. Because, for example, Jan van Eyck is not an exhibiting institution, it's not a museum. So we don't need to, in theory, to do exhibitions to present anything. But of course, our artist residency, such as Jan van Eyck, has that mode of public presentation as a part of the functioning of the institution, right? So maybe I'm wondering if there are ways of working with these moments of public presentation and developing maybe other kinds of spectators and spectatorship. Maybe spectatorship is not the right word at all, but developing other modes of public.
Yeah.
And then it becomes interesting, because the question is not only what type of artistic practices we are allowing to flourish, but also in relation to that, how can we maybe create other modes of engagement between the public and these artistic processes. And this is something I haven't really fully explored yet at the Jan van Eyck, also because for a long time the building was closed to the public due to the COVID pandemic.
Yeah.
But I think this can be this rehearsal of possibilities of how to engage with the public in relation to these processes that are unfolding, and not necessarily with the fixity of the moment of presentation that we have in museums, for example. And I'm generalizing. There are many museums that are working also with this idea of process, right? But, I'm generalizing. Mm-hmm. If there's something we can benefit from this obligation of being a presentation institution, maybe there's some other type of public engagement that can be created there.
Yeah, maybe. I think Documenta, what it did was breaking the dichotomy between artist and public, but going beyond participatory practice through this already overused concept of Lumbung, right?
Yeah.
Which encompasses also social, aesthetic, and economic aspects, and engages the the spectator, or invites the spectator to become a member of the community. And this might be actually a really interesting perspective for art residency programs in general, to consider both residents, current, past, and future residents as, or to some extent future residents, as being members of one community.
Yeah.
And maybe people that come in or that are from the neighborhood or that come and visit during the open days can also be engaged in this community that goes beyond spectatorship or participatory art, but goes in different ways of support structures and exchange. And that would actually also break I'm not sure how present this sense is at the Jan van Eyck Academy, but I know for instance for the Rijksacademie that there is a clear, even though unspoken, understanding among the residents that some of them are going to walk out of the door with the gallerist and others are not. And basically they already know who is in which group, right? So there is a hegemony of competition there. Engaging more through modes of community would actually also be a way to break this hegemony of competition as well. What do you think of that?
Maybe, but the agenda of artists is also varies so much. No, I think, and also why people want to go to a residency varies a lot, and it's something that you cannot homogenize. Like if the decision is also on the base of the work, and on different trajectories, and you want this plurality, you cannot also homogenize their underlying intentions that can be also commercial and so or market driven. So
but I think it's not necessarily opposed, right? Like
No.
in Documenta 15 the works were for sale.
Yeah.
In a very different way than you would usually see without the gallery there. So it's the economic aspect can be even included in these kind of discussions.
I think also again there are different residencies that put emphasis on different things, right? And as an artist, you can strategically navigate between a residency that will allow you to, get more visibility and maybe a market entry, while others not. No, so you can also play with that dramaturgy of like moving around and at specific crucial points get more visibility and open these other doors. But you're right. I think the Jan van Eyck, because of the location, because of many other factors, that's maybe not the emphasis, even though, of course, there's a high degree of visibility that comes into it. And yeah, I think the previous groups, also with COVID, I could feel that different artists had different expectations. And there were not an extreme demand for this market visibility in the groups that I followed. Which at all makes it a rule for the upcoming ones. It really varies. But yeah, the expectations are really different. But it's interesting to think of ways in which we could leverage that entry to the market, or that relation to the markets, to what we're talking about here in terms of creations of sustainable frameworks for the future, for example, or new modes of spectatorship. But I don't know yet what is the best solution.
It's a tricky one.
Yeah.
It can also be another way of market domination that okay. But I don't think we're going to resolve this.
No. But I mean, in contexts in which you don't have a state support, such as in the Netherlands, then you have to compromise,
right,
with the market. So
or with the community.
Yes,
it depends.
Did we cover all of our points?
I would like to close this conversation with a citation from you that you wrote down in the preparations, because I think it's beautiful. Here goes. The current state of urgency paradoxically demands systemic thinking and the embracing of complexity, opacity, and delay, which are at the core of creative, innovative, and speculative practices. I think that very simply and in a very it embraces both the simplicity and the complexity of the issues that we dealt with today. And I think there's many more discussions to be had. But I want to thank you today, Bruno, for being here with us and sharing your insights. And I hope that the Jan van Eyck new policy document will be a great success. That you will have a beautiful new year with the residents that are coming in a month from now.
Yes. Cool. Thank you for having me. Thank you all.